Welcome to the Business Clubhouse Conversations podcast with me, Ash Taylor, your host. I'm really happy to introduce you to a friend of mine who've not known for that long, actually. So it's probably about 2 years now, but Bradley Hatchett. How are you, Brad?
Hi, Ash. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty well. It's a bit gloomy out there, but at least it's not raining, which makes a change. So Brad, ironically, or maybe not, I suppose this is what you want to happen. I met you through networking. So it's a bit of a lead into, do you want to just tell people what you do? And then we'll just kind of go into your background and stuff like that. But, what do you do? Who do you do it for? What are you trying to, bring to the world?
Absolutely. Yeah. I founded Network My Club about 5 years ago now. We're a business networking organization, membership organization, really bringing businesses together using iconic sporting venues as the place to do that. The premise of the business was built with a big sporting background of mine, a big interest in sport, and also wanting to make networking something that people want to do rather than feel like they have to. And there's no better place to network than a place like Twickenham Stadium or the Oval Cricket Ground, in comparison to a bar or a cafe in the city or something like that. So our members across all different industries, different shapes and sizes, but ultimately it's making networking something you want to do rather than feel like you have to.
Do you think, before we go into your background too much, because there's a good question there, do you think business owners feel like they should be networking? Versus wanting to do it and getting excited about it and leveraging it effectively?
Well, when I started the business, it wasn't a case of I've got to break down the stigma that networking is this thing that people feel like they should be doing, that it's just men in suits in a windowless room and it's not very interesting to go to. It wasn't about that. It was, my background had been in sport. I saw that stadiums were very underutilized and that they provided a great space to bring businesses together. And the venue and the sport acted as an icebreaker. And when I started the business, what I did start to see, and going to a lot of networking events myself that weren't ours, it just seemed that a lot of people were going, oh, kind of here again for another couple of hours and seeing what I can get. And I just thought that, these people were sort of losing networking before they even stepped in the room because they thought it was a bit of a chore going to it. So over time, I just realized that the culture and the mindset of people coming to our events compared to perhaps others was that people really loved coming to our venues. They liked coming to the events, and that just happened over time. It became another mission of mine to sort of break that stigma down. But I do. It's all dependent on the role. So if it's a business owner, I see it less so, because that business owner has, they've got a lot of control in sort of what they do and what they do with their time. But if it's a sales manager, business development manager, sales director, that sort of role, it can feel like it's a bit of a tick box exercise for those people, and a case of just going to see what they can get. And as I say, that's you're pretty much you're going in with the wrong mindset in that respect. So I do see it a bit, and that's definitely been something that's evolved over the years, as something that we've really wanted to try and break that stigma down. And if anyone's coming to our events and not really wanting to be there, and it's like, there's plenty of other events for you to go to. So that's just something that's evolved over time, really.
Yeah, it's interesting, because when I started networking, because I hadn't really done a huge amount of networking in my old business, which was in sport, and I hadn't needed to, because my clients were not in. My networking was hanging outside the school gate. Don't take that the wrong way, but the more mums I could meet, the more kids we could get into our programs, kind of thing, and flyer drops and doing assemblies and all that sort of stuff. And I started networking towards the end of that business, partly because I realised I needed more partners in the business. And I thought, well, where are the partners hanging out? They're probably networking. And then when I moved into the area I live in now, near Gerrards Cross, sort of South Bucks, I thought, well, how am I going to meet people? I don't know anybody in this village, in this town, so I'll find some business networking and go to them. And I've seen you're just making me aware of this. The first, dozen networking events I went to, all, I'll say this slightly carefully, but all seemed to be run by people in professional services, and it was all quite stale, relatively elderly, perhaps, and quite formal. That was that sort of B&I type stigma around it. But I am noticing a lot more networking now that's much more vibrant and a lot more relaxed and informal. And there are fewer people with shirts and ties, and people turn out in polos and t-shirts and all that sort of stuff. Is that something you're noticing generally, or do you not get out of your own network enough to sort of get a comparison?
I think, and we spoke about this before, that people network for different reasons, and people, will pick a networking group, and there are lots of different groups out there. People will pick a group based on the format, how structured it is, how regimented it is, the types of people that are there, the mindset of the people that are there, not just the industries and the size of businesses. These are all things that people will consider now. And from that, new networking groups have appeared and have been set up. I mean, that's one thing that we have to fight against a lot, is the sheer amount of networking groups and networking events. But what I do say to a lot of people is that networking is our business. We aren't a solicitor or a law firm that's running their own networking event and has as a bit of a side hustle. This is our business. The quality of our events, the experience we give our members, ultimately is our key objective, and is ultimately going to give us longevity in business and keeping people coming back and events being well received. So that's one thing that we fight against. But I think people network for so many different reasons that there has been lots of different formats, lots of different groups popping up over. I mean, even in the 5 years we've been going, the amount of networking groups that have just come and gone in the different areas that we work in is
I can think of a few.
Mind-boggling, really. But and it typically comes down to someone thinking, oh, it's so easy to start a networking group, but it isn't just about hiring a room and seeing how many people you can get in the room. It's all about culture, format, the experience you're giving people. Because there is so much choice now that people go, oh, I've done that one and it wasn't very good, I'll go to another one. So that's what we fight against a lot. And I think that has come in a good way, because people are networking for lots of different reasons. And you say the likes of B&I, which has been around for decades.
So it must work. It's still there.
It must work, but their ethos is referrals, very, very numbers driven. And that's really, and we're kind of at the other end of the spectrum in terms of the format of our events. And our events well. They have a format and a structure, but they are nice and informal, and it's all about people buying into the people they want to do some business with. So I think the variation of networking has come as a result of people realizing that networking can be done for lots of different reasons other than just generating referrals and business.
Some of it is social as well, isn't it? And supportive, as we talked about off air. And I think especially times like this, and we're currently recording this in our second phase of lockdown, and I think we had a good chat off air actually, that networking for some people has been, I'm not sure I'll go as far as to say as a lifeline, but certainly a business lifeline, in terms of being able to talk to people and recognize that other people are going through the same challenges that they're going through, and being able to share that can be really powerful. It can be really cool just to go, I'm struggling with this, and actually having other people put their hand up and say, yeah, I know how that feels, because we're going through the same thing. We've just furloughed 8 members of staff or whatever it is, and I don't know if we're going to get any grants, or I'm self-employed and I fall through the bracket, or do you think I should take out this loan? And there's so much complexity around what support was available, that actually when you get a group of business owners in a room and they have an opportunity to chat those things through, especially when the problem is complex or new. I do find that when you get that sort of diverse group of people who are coming from different industries, different backgrounds, for different reasons, you tend to solve the problems far more effectively. And that must be a really nice thing to see, almost as a spin-off from what you're doing. And I mean, have you found that in the last couple of months, especially?
Yeah, I mean, but the early stages of lockdown 1.0, we should call it, as we are we are currently in 2.0. The people, I said to you off air that the first 2 months of that were so much about people supporting one another and sharing the challenges, and that in itself has created some really strong bonds and relationships between our members. Members that, again, the beauty of online is that we had members networking with each other from totally different regions that they perhaps would never have networked with before. But they've built these bonds and these relationships up just through these shared challenges, and they made themselves vulnerable almost by saying, I've got this challenge as a business. And we also made a bit of a point of doing that in the early stages as a team. We wanted to understand what the challenges were that our members were going through, because we saw it day in, day out. We were impacted quite a lot early on just from people cutting all costs and that sort of thing. But we really wanted to understand our members even more by asking these questions during our events, by saying, what is the biggest challenge in your business right now? And, it became so informative for us. And we as a team have got even better relationships with our members as a result of that. So yeah, that definitely, from a member interaction perspective and engagement, was huge. And the other point you make there, with so many different businesses, different walks of life, people are coming from, something I only read it in a blog post earlier, actually, the value of group diversity really shone through, because you've got so many different people. And I read in this blog, it was talking about, why would you want to go into the room where there's all the same people? You want to go in somewhere where people have got different challenges, different businesses, and you can just learn so much. And that comes from, members engaging and being proactive in sharing that information. Because that really, it was a bit of a business lifeline for people in terms of online networking at the start of it. But it really, for those that threw themselves into it, it's become, they're now seeing the fruits of that because they've built those relationships. So that's just an example of networking during the COVID times and the pandemic. That's really we've seen it across the board. It's really shone through for our members.
You ran lots of events, but you ran one, I'm trying to think, 2 weeks ago with my namesake, Ash Smith, who was the speaker. And I think that was the first one where you got Anders to run the event, and you took a step back in the background, which was quite entertaining. He did a great job, by the way. If you listen to this, he was super. And I think I put in the chat comments about the book that I've read twice now, second read of it, which is Rebel Ideas by Matthew Syed, who's a name I'm sure you'll know, because we both at the time. He's Black Box Thinking, Bounce, obviously, and his background is table tennis. And I would urge anyone who's got kind of that interest, not necessarily in sport, but in that sort of in diverse thinking. He uses a term called cognitive diversity, which is what the whole book is about. And it's an incredible read. It's fascinating. It does talk about that actually, if you want to solve problems, and we are in complex times, then bring as wide a range of people as you possibly can to the table, because you've got the greatest chance of solving those problems. And Mike Brearley, who you'll also be aware of as well, ex-England captain, he talked about the same thing, that he used to surround himself as a cricket coach with people from other sports, and it was something that nobody had ever spoken about before or done. Yeah. And Matthew Syed's part of Gareth Southgate's set up at the FA now, isn't he? And you've got David Brailsford's involved, all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to take you back a little bit, if that's okay. So your background's in sport. Did you play? Let's unpick some of that. You obviously spent time in sporting arenas, and you noticed that there was a lack of use. Did you play? Was it professional? What level? How did you get into business? What was your first job? Let's just unpick a bit of Bradley's history.
That's it. I've played sport since I could stand up, I think, but played at a decent level cricket. Didn't get to a professional level. My brother did. My brother spent 6 years playing professionally for Sussex, and I made the decision sort of in my late teens or mid to late teens that I didn't really have the passion for it, wasn't that interested in it, and made the decision that what I want to do is do something evolved around sport. I didn't know what. My godfather, who has been a big influence in my life, he's also also a co-director of Network My Club, and sort of his background had been in the commercial side of sport, in broadcasting and that sort of thing. And when I was growing up, he used to take me and Dad to these Champions League games at Old Trafford and Stamford Bridge and Highbury, and I remember leaving those games and going, Dad, whatever Richard does, I want to do, because I just thought it was the best job, going into these lounges before a game and having dinner with all these lovely people, and just thought, if Richard does this for his job, I thought this is
brilliant.
this is what I want to do. And yeah, so when I made the decision leaving college that going to university wasn't really for me, I wanted to go into the industry or get some experience, and just wanted to do something involved in sport, and started working in a marketing agency that had a couple of clients. One was Umbro and one was Lucasade, and just very low level project assistant type work. And I was interested because some of the projects we were working on were football boot launches and drinks around football and rugby and that sort of thing. So it interested me. And then my sort of big step on the ladder, as it were, Richard at the time was chairman of the America's Cup, a big sailing event. And they had a World Series event in Plymouth. And I just said, look, can I do something down there? And he gave me a month's worth of experience with his PA and the media and communications director. Spent a month down in Plymouth and on the event, and it was brilliant. That was just a month, and then I needed to find another role. But with that experience, I got a role in the commercial team at Brighton and Albion Football Club, and spent 4 years there in the partnerships and sponsorships team. Brilliant place to work, because not only did I support the club, but it was in the Amex Stadium, which was brand new at the time.
Brand new, yeah.
A brilliant place to work. And from there, the idea of Network My Club came to fruition, just purely on the basis of being able to utilize a stadium from a events perspective. And yeah, that's how a long story short, how it came to fruition. But ultimately, it was just wanting to be involved in sport in one way, shape, or form, and trying to find something. And Network My Club is really involved in the sporting environment in terms of our locations, but our business is very much business to business networking. So that's a very, very quick sort of history in terms of where I came from and to. But no, my brother got the professional sportsman's genes, not me.
So did you, when you had the idea for Network My Club, was that because you were inside the stadium, and there probably was, once a fortnight, build up to a midweek game as well, all this frenetic activity, and then you have, a couple of 100 minutes where it's just full to the brim, and it's chaos, and then it's lying empty. And was there a moment where you went, this is ridiculous? Why is the stadium not full the rest of the time? And I've got a friend of mine who worked at Wembley. I think I mentioned you to him. He ran the events at Wembley, brought boxing back to Wembley, that sort of stuff. And for him, it was about, well, how do we get crowds in more often? How do we fill the stadium side of it with events, rather than, well, we've got all these meeting rooms, we've got all these boxes, we've got all these spaces that are lying empty. So was that the thing that made you go, well, how can we leverage it, and what's the gap? Tell me about your thinking around that.
You learn very quickly when you're working in a stadium like that day in, day out, that it's only being used for its main purpose 5% of the year, if that. In our case, 23 days a year when we were playing football. So you had the rest of the year when it was empty. And the idea came about from a friend of mine who worked in the commercial team before my time there. So my role at Brighton had involved running our own internally run networking group. So that was one of my babies amongst running our kit sponsors and corporate members and that sort of thing. And from speaking to my counterparts at other clubs up and down the country, there seemed to be a real demand and a need for a networking group or a want for a networking group at their stadium. They all realized that they had this empty space, but they just didn't have the resource to be able to deliver it. And the premise of Network My Club came about from that, going, well, there seems to be a need for, the need is wanting, or the want is a business club and a networking group. The challenge is not having the resource to do that internally. So Network My Club was born, where we provide that service and that solution. And as a company, we'll engage with the local business community and bring them to the stadium as a place to network. And then the clubs can interact with them, they can show off their beautiful facilities, and it's just a much different environment to network in than others around the town or city. So yeah, it definitely came about from my time there. You realise that it is empty for a big portion of the time, and that clubs, professional clubs, have so many other things to consider, from their top line sponsors down to hospitality on a match day and everything in between. And the business clubs can be very time consuming, and we kind of take that away from them and focus on ourselves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And was it a big step to kind of go, do you know what, I'm going to leave this job where I know I've got a salary and it's okay, and there's probably a career path for me, you know, if not at Brighton, then maybe at other clubs or whatever, and go, no, I'm going to stop on this date, and on this date I'm going to start this business, and I'm going to have my box of business cards and I go networking and grow. Is that the way it worked, or did you sort of phase yourself in? And...
No, it was a very difficult decision. I saw the vision, and I could completely see where it could go, but it was a very difficult decision because I was almost in my dream job at 20, 21, 22, working at the club that I love, in a role that I saw progression in a team that, you know, I was meeting lots of people and working on some really cool things, and was working at football, which was just the best thing ever. And so for me to make that jump was big, because, and the amount of times, and I'm sure many business owners will relate to this, the amount of times I've thought, God, what I'd give to just go back to that stable salary. And those first 2 years was a bit like, why the hell have I done this? But making the jump was harder because of the role that I was in. But obviously that role gave me the expertise and the knowledge to actually start it. I had the idea, and sort of said to mum and dad, I was like, what do you think? You know, I've got to do it at some point, I think. And mum's got a bit of an entrepreneurial background, business owner background. She said, well, there's no better time to do it now. You're young, you've got no commitments, you've got nothing hanging over you. She was like, right, just go for it. But I'd recommend just run it past Richard, my godfather. And I ran it past Richard, and I remember meeting him in a pub in Chichester and had this business plan in front of him and presented him the idea. And at the time, he'd just finished his role with the America's Cup and was sort of not really doing a lot. And he said, yeah, if you really believe in it, I see the potential. I'll invest in it to get it going for a stake in the company. And that allowed me to leave my role, gave me a little bit to kind of put into the company as sort of setup costs. Yeah. But you know, a lot of those setup costs were gone within the first couple of months, and then you're on your own. So that was really the process. I really couldn't have done it if it wasn't for Richard buying into it and buying into my vision and really seeing where we wanted to take it. And yeah, it was made difficult based on the role that I was in, because I saw real potential in that and real longevity in that. But it was kind of the best time for me to do it. So yeah, that was really my thought process and the challenges that I had there.
That sounds really exciting though, because you're right. When you don't have, I mean, I work with a lot of business owners who are trying to shift through the gears, if you like, of their businesses, but they're doing it very aware that they've got perhaps a young family, partner, you know, husband, wife, you know, responsibilities and all the rest of it. And it's quite a scary thing to do, because that level of risk is that much higher. So I suppose you have taken the leap at the right sort of time in your life, because, you know, you can see now, you know, where it can go, and you can see that vision being fulfilled. And I think the thing that's come out of this that struck me more than anything else is your absolute clarity of vision. Because I do, it's not like I get frustrated, but I do find it really difficult when I meet people and I say to them, right, so what does the business look like in 5 years' time? You know, describe the vision for me. What, you know, you must know what you're trying to build. And I'm like, no, not really. You just think, well, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? You know, and the thing that stands out for me is it's not just that you had that vision, but you were able to articulate it so passionately and so clearly to somebody else that, okay, appreciate that Richard's your godfather, but if it sounds like from what you and I have spoken about before, that if he thought the business plan was a load of hooey and you didn't believe in you and the vision, he would have gone, yeah, go for it, and walked away and not invested in the business. So that's really, I think that's a big lesson for people listening, is get your head around the vision, that, really, really understand what it is that you want to achieve and what it looks like. And the numbers don't necessarily need to be there, but you need to see the passion so describe that vision for me. And it might be that you don't want to give away all your growth secrets, but if you go back to that time and you go back to that pub in Chichester, what were you describing?
Well, I mean, as I said at the start, it wasn't really addressing a problem within networking. It was addressing a problem or a need and a demand in facilitating networking at these really cool sporting venues. And that just evolved, the networking side of things evolved. So I saw the need for that, across the country. There were very few, probably 3 or 4 clubs doing it themselves. And I thought, well, if that's the amount of, out of all the football, cricket, rugby clubs there are in the country, there's a huge amount that would open their doors up and welcome a conversation. So I had a vision of that this can be national, and that is still the vision. Obviously, where you are with just a business plan, your growth expectations are probably a little bit unrealistic. Certainly were at 22 years old when I was putting them together. But yeah, you have to have that idea, and I think that's something that's, to be honest, I haven't really looked at that business plan again, and I've still got it on file because I want to have a look at it at some point.
In a drawer somewhere.
But it definitely, the principles of it and the ultimate vision and the long-term vision will be very similar to where I am now, and just how we're going to get there will change. And obviously the last 7 months has pushed that back probably a little bit, but here we are. But yeah, having that long-term vision was so crucial for getting buy-in from Richard, from getting also buy-in from our initial the clubs that took the risk on us. And yeah, there was a question I was asked a lot early on, and still am today, by a lot of people, but it still remains the same. The long-term goal of the company still remains the same. There's that infamous graphic of what success looks like, and everyone thinks it's that straight line, but it's that whole up and down picture. And that's never truer. And I've since starting the business, which you don't get prepared for at school, you don't get prepared for in life, in starting a business, and it's the loneliest place in the world at times. And that's something that I know you'll probably ask me later about things that I can reflect on if I was to start this all over again. But how lonely the journey can be at times. But going back to that vision is what's kept me on the straight path to try and succeed and keep pushing on through those days where I do think, oh, I'd love to go back to that guaranteed salary and being able to plan my life and all these things that you have to sacrifice as a result of being a business owner and pursuing that vision. That's what keeps you going, and definitely has got me through those days. So yeah, you're right in that everyone should have that vision, should be able to visualize it, should be able to articulate it. And whether that rings true, as I say, my vision where I was when I first pitched that idea to Richard was probably 2 years ago, but we're not there yet. But I know we're making the right steps to get there. And there's things that you can't foresee that come up. A global pandemic being one, but there's plenty of others on even small things that get in the way. So yeah, you're right. Having that vision will get you through those days. And to your point about having the passion, I've got ultimate passion in making Network My Club the success that I know it can be. And I listened to a podcast recently with Eddie Hearn, and he has a great line that he uses, and it's like, no passion, no point. And it is.
Yeah, I like that.
I asked myself, what would I be doing if I wasn't doing this? It'd probably be in a job that working for someone, paying the bills, gradually going up the ladder. Well, that's not going to excite me. So I've got the passion, and as Eddie Hearn says, it's stuck with me now. No passion, no point. So
yeah, there's that other saying, I can't remember who it was. that, if you don't have a vision, you'll end up working for somebody else's.
Yeah,
it's a very, very similar thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's possibly quite ironic. You've built a team that are equally passionate about what you do. They're always very engaging, and they're easy to get a hold of. That nothing's too much trouble, and that's a very cultural thing that you've obviously instigated and attracted people to you. And there's a possible irony there that at some point one of them will have a conversation with you along the same lines of, "I've got this great job and I really enjoy it, but I've got this idea." And in to a degree, there's probably a part of you that hopes that will happen, with somebody, maybe not today, but at some point, if one of your staff were to come to you, one of your team come to you and say, "Do you know what? I love this, but I've got this idea and I want to follow it. And can I go with your blessing?" That would almost be full circle, wouldn't it?
It really would, yeah. And I would never stand in their way, and I can give them as much advice as possible. But, I would never stand in their way. And that's something that, from a cultural perspective, there's lots of things that probably growing a team and managing people has been the biggest area of development, and something that still, I'm fascinated by and I'd really struggle with. It's probably been my biggest struggle in trying to get that right. But putting on the table and saying that any idea is a bad idea is something that I'm really keen to instigate. And we could have the smallest thing or the biggest thing come to the table, and having that environment where people feel comfortable to do that. That's just one of many things that we do. So if they do come to me and say, "I've got this cool idea that I want to run with," brilliant. That's
and maybe you'll invest in it.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, so you just starting to draw this close a little bit. It's fascinating, and I know we've had conversations in the past. We can go off on all sorts of tangents. I'm desperately trying not to start talking about football last night and all the rest of it. You and I are supposed to go and see England Denmark together.
We were, yeah. That was the week of the lockdown, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? We will have to revisit that one.
We will do, yeah.
One day. So if you could, go back to that pub in Chichester now, okay, and Richard pops off to the loo or to get the next round of drinks, and you could sidle in alongside yourself, and you've got that 30 seconds, he's at the bar, and you could say to that, the Bradley that you were then, given all your experience and everything you've learned, you've mentioned about, learning how to manage people and build a team and the culture and all the rest of it. What would be the piece of advice you'd pass on to, that Bradley, knowing what you know now and having experienced the journey?
I would prepare them for the sacrifice. I think that's something that I was aware of, that as starting a business, and you go from earning a salary to nothing. And yes, I was lucky that Richard decided to invest £10,000. It was to get us going, but that was eaten up very quickly by setup costs and starting something pretty much from scratch. You sacrifice a hell of a lot. I think preparing myself for that a little bit better. I've managed well with that, and even to this day, you still continue to sacrifice, and I think you always do as a business owner. But I think preparing them for that, and also preparing myself for the managing people. I think someone said to me really early on, before I'd taken on Anders, who was our first employee, was the best. Employing people will be the best and worst thing you've ever done. And I think, what's the downside? What's the downside? I couldn't.
They're people.
Yeah, I couldn't see the downside. But you're right; they are human beings, and it's not just about managing them from when they log on in the morning and when they log off. It's everything in between, and managing them as human beings. And that probably takes up not my time, but my mental capacity, a huge amount of my mental capacity every month. And that's no fault of theirs. That's how I am. And that's something that I'm trying to improve and trying to manage, and not expecting too much from them. And that's one thing that, I read, I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk, who I follow on social media, said something like that: just as long as you understand as a business owner, entrepreneur, whatever, that your staff won't have the same level of passion and commitment as you, that manages all your expectations. So where I'm logged on at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and I'm sending emails and I'm putting stuff out there, and I'm, don't expect to reply then, expect to reply tomorrow, or when they've done their bits and pieces, and when they've got through their to-do list, and not expecting that instant response. And I was probably guilty of that in the early days, but I've certainly managed that back. And that's, you probably gauge the whole managing people thing is something that really fascinates me, and something that I am always striving to improve. And I don't get it right all the time, but hopefully my guys are open enough, and we've got a transparent relationship enough that they'll tell me that I haven't. So I think definitely the managing people side of things was a huge thing for me. And I know you're big on it, but outsourcing, outsourcing work when you can. And I probably pulled the trigger on employing more people than I needed to early on, but we've got around it, and we're in a healthy position now. But in hindsight, I probably would outsource things to get the business to a point where it's sustainable to bring an employee on, because now I know all the baggage is a very negative term, but all the baggage that comes with employing someone. So that's definitely something, probably a couple of things there that I'd focus on.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and a few people have mentioned that in these podcasts as well, that learning how to, I don't know, it's a big difference between managing people and leading them. I believe, and great leaders make easy, comfortable managers as well, but not all managers make great leaders. And there is a big difference. And I think you lead your team very well, because the passion that they exude, as I said earlier, they're really easy to get on with, and all the rest of it. I don't get the impression that they're in at 9 and leave at 5. They give you more than that, and you only get that from people who lead, not from people who manage. So I think that you're probably further along the line than you think you are in terms of that, but that's because you're consciously aware of it, and you're trying to improve yourself and look at those things. I think that's really important. So where's the best place to go? Well, actually, I had another question before I closed off. Who on that last point? Who's the best? Go back, not necessarily sports specific, but this is where my head is going. Who's the best leader you've come across? Not necessarily physically met.
Always. I have the privilege of meeting a lot of business owners, and I take a lot from everyone that I meet, whether that's someone that manages a team of 5, whether that's someone that leads a team of 20 or 50. So I try and take a lot from a lot of our members and a lot of businesses that I meet in passing. I think high profile wise, I've listened and read a lot from Clive Woodward, who has got a fascinating background. Everyone attributes him to just rugby, but his background before rugby was business, and he's just brilliant from understanding people and the methods that he installs in how he works, both with businesses and sports people. So he's a big one. But also, I think anyone that treats their people well, I'm a huge admirer of, because if they've got that awareness to do that, putting people first, there's no secret and or no surprise that their business is thriving, because their people are well looked after. So I've always seen good examples of that. There's a guy called Dan Price in America who runs a company called Gravity Payments, and he made international press because he was the first business person to increase the salary of all his staff to 70K.
Yes.
And he reduced his salary from 1.5 million down to 70K. So I look at him a lot, and I think anyone that can look after their people is a good person to use as an example.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd forgotten that story. Yeah, it's not a story; it's a fact, isn't it? Really amazing. So, if people want to try out Network My Club, because I would urge anyone listening to this that if you're looking for a great network opportunity, then it's definitely a place to try. And I've tried to send a few people along, and certainly at the moment, it's much easier to access than taking a train into London, as I used to do, to come to the Oval. Not that I resented that, because it's a lovely place to go. Although I think 4 months running, every time I went, it rained. So I get off the tube absolutely soaked. I don't have to deal with that anymore. So how do people find out more about Network My Club if they want to get involved and come and try you out?
Yeah, just have a look at Network My Club online. We're very big on LinkedIn, so we'd be keen to connect up with people on that. So yeah, those or get in contact with me via LinkedIn is always a good one.
Perfect. Easy. Brilliant. Brad, thank you so much for coming on, agreeing to do this with us.
No worries, Ash. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. And I'll see you very soon.
Thank you.